So welcome everyone to our third and final Rights of Way winter webinar series through Canadian Wildlife Federation. Today's topic is on the Eastview Pollinator Park, a landfill restoration case study. I'm just going to go through some basic housekeeping items. So just an introduction to MS Teams. If you haven't used it before, you can use the chat button to ask about technical problems with your screen or your setup, and also to introduce yourself. And then you can use the Q&A box to put your questions in, and we will answer them at the end. And then if you're having problems with your audio, you can check the more box and check your audio settings. And I do recommend using a headset. You tend to get better quality through your headset. And some basic engagement guidelines. So please engage with the topic and the speaker and share and inquire about things you're interested in. Create a common language. So please use clarify any acronyms or things that you're using that people may not be familiar with. Oh, we're getting some sound. Okay. Be empathetic and assume good intent with all the speakers and your participants. Be curious, listen, and disagree respectfully. And please be mindful that when you put a question in, or if we ask you to speak up for a question, to try and keep your questions as concise as possible. And so here we are hosting this webinar in Ottawa, Canada's capital. We acknowledge that we're on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. If you don't know the land you are joining us from today, I encourage you to take a moment after the webinar to look at this website. It's called native-land.ca, and you can find your area and find out your Indigenous folks. So just as a general introduction to our Rights of Way as Habitat program, for those of you who are not familiar, we work collaboratively with land managers, and we focus on restoring breeding and migratory habitat for monarch butterfly and other pollinators. So we do a lot of work with energy and transportation rights of way, as well as other types of land use. We currently have 4 communities of practice: our Southwest Ontario group, our GTHA, which is Greater Toronto Hamilton area, Eastern Ontario, and our newest group is our Western Quebec group. And you'll find our email there if you want to reach out to us at all. And here I'm just sharing our QR code. So if you pull that up on a phone, then you can find all of our different resources that are available, because we have webinars going back for a number of years now, as well as guides and how-to things, various different great resources. And just to note that this webinar is being recorded. If you are a registrant, then the link will be shared to you when it's posted, and we will put it on our YouTube playlist with all the other webinars that we have done, so you'll have access to those. So without further ado, to introduce today's speaker is Dr. Victoria MacPhail. She's an ecologist and pollination biologist with expertise in pollination, from plant breeding systems to bumblebee identification and pollinator-friendly gardening. She has a PhD in community science and conservation from York University, an MSc from the University of Guelph, and a BSc from the University of Prince Edward Island. She is the former coordinator of the Canadian Pollinator Initiative Network and the Centre for Bee Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation. She has developed the Native Pollinator Initiative at Wildlife Preservation Canada, and has worked in has worked in government, academia, and environmental NGOs. She is a founding member and current co-chair for Pollinator Guelph, a completely volunteer-run charitable organization that works to protect pollinators and their habitats. So I will call Victoria to come up and share her slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. Should we get this launched into presenter mode? Sorry, it's just a little lag, it seems. I am pressing this. There we go. Yes, so thanks, Tracy. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying the sunny day. At least it's sunny here in Guelph, Ontario, which is where I'm presenting from. I'm happy to talk to you about the landfill restoration project, really a habitat creation project that we're doing at the Eastview landfill here in Guelph. And as Tracy indicated, I'm with Pollination Guelph, and our contact information and various social media handles are on this screen. And as Tracy said, it will be available on YouTube later on. So I hope you can tune in later on and share the link with your friends. It's a bit of an overview of my talk. I'll give a background to what the landfill site actually was like and how big it is, that kind of thing. The idea of the pollinator park and how it originated, the initial planning we did, of course, challenges that we encountered, implementation methods, and of course, the results and our next steps. So Eastview landfill was initially known as the Guelph Sanitary Landfill. It operated for 42 years from the 60s to just early 2000s in the northeast corner of Guelph. So you see this image here, the little yellow box is where the landfill is currently located. It's a pretty large site. It's 81 hectares in total, but only about half of that was used for garbage. So 45 hectares is the area that we're going to be talking about in terms of the landfill or pollinator park area. Within this area, there are 4 million tons of solid non-hazardous waste deposit in the site. So everything from residential waste through to some commercial dumping was going on at the site. We suspect that the site was probably a former landfill site. So again, here the yellow box is actual landfill overall site. It actually has a clay base, and that's the reason landfill was selected, because we started realizing in the 60s or 50s that landfills can leach, the garbage can leak out and potentially contaminate our groundwater. And so they wanted to use a clay base to hopefully prevent some of that from happening. And clay bases are pretty common in wetlands. Another tip off is that if you look at the surrounding areas, ignore the residential area and the agriculture, there's quite a lot of wetlands, including provincially significant ones and locally significant ones. Also, interestingly, with the little blue dots is Hadati Creek. It's obviously a little creek or a little stream that runs through the area, and it was rerouted to go around the landfill site. So obviously through both culverts and open air or open access, a little stream bed. And so yes, as I say, it was a landfill site. Here's some photos from the city I've taken of the site. There's garbage, there are seagulls, there are dump trucks, the whole thing. I moved to Guelph a year after the landfill closed, so I never actually visited the landfill operation. But if you are from Guelph, you probably have good memories, or not necessarily good memories, but memories at least of going to the dump. I get more images. It was an active dump. There were, dump trucks and I say bulldozers, everything. They sort of move the garbage into piles. And then when an area got full, they would bury it and cap it. So they take the non-landfill portion of the site, clay, again, that clay base from probable landfill, to cover up the garbage. And then they just sort of put some topsoil over top of that. Excuse me. And again, you see in this image, my mouse works here, the little red hatched areas of the areas are landfilled, and that other section is areas where it's non-landfilled to get the clay from to cap it. So they put the clay soil over top of it and then topsoil. And then because they wanted to ensure erosion didn't happen, they put a cool season grass mix down. This is the city of Guelph and related individuals to kind of prevent that erosion from happening. When the landfill was being closed, the sort of closure plan said we're turning into an open space. But what kind of space wasn't really clarified, at least in that initial report. And so the city did a survey of public residents and said the public wanted a park. But again, what kind of park we're talking about, what's going to be involved is still a little up for discussion. Fast forwarding about 4 years, in 2007, unrelated to the initial discussion with landfill, is a time when colony collapse is already hitting the news in the States and in Canada, with bees disappearing and dying off, and the public was starting to get a bit more interested in pollinators. I was just finished my master's at the University of Guelph at the time, still working with Dr. Peter Kevin and colleagues. And we had a meeting with local conservation authorities, city councilors, other local parties, just trying to tell about pollinators. At that time, people didn't know much about pollinators. They're kind of they're honeybees, they make honey, that's about it for pollinators. But of course, as many of you know, a lot more to pollination and pollinators than honeybees and honey. And so we wanted just a general meeting to talk about creating more habitat in the city and adjacent areas. And at this meeting was Vicki Beard, who was then a city councilor, who said, well, hey, we have this landfill site in the northeast corner of the city that's just sitting there. Could we create that as pollinator habitat? And of course, yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing idea, a nice big site to work with. So Vicki, myself, Dr. Peter Kevin, and adjacent other colleagues, we kind of spearheaded a local initiative to kind of look into this idea of creating a pollinator park. So you started having public meetings right off the bat, and people are very enthusiastic about this. Again, people started really liking pollinators and the idea of creating a pollinator park, kind of the first in the world for a really designated pollinator park, not just habitat that's beneficial to pollinators, but a deliberately designed park for pollinators. And so we had University of Guelph landscape architecture class out, giving us some ideas what to do with the site. We actually had a meeting with what was then called the Canadian Pollinator Protection Initiative with Karen, current mayor Karen Farbridge was kind of giving the opening address. So again, lots of attention locally and nationally, and lots of support from the city council at the time as well. What was then the Guelph Pollinator Initiative turned into the Pollination Guelph organization. And we were all volunteers from various backgrounds. We met for the first time in August, bringing all our expertise and enthusiasm. Some of us were ecologists and pollination biologists. Some of us were just people interested in gardening, interested in conservation. Obviously, lots of planning to be involved in taking something this big. So we did a lot of research ourselves into best practices and best techniques. We consulted with different organizations. For example, I have a screenshot here. We commissioned MacPhail and Natvic to create our implementation plan, or some suggestions at least on that. And of course, we did a lot of permits. So we'll talk about some of those permits as I go through the talk. I will note he's underlined this Mathis in his report, saying site preparation is the most important determinant of success in creating these types of meadow habitats. In 2009, we actually finally got unanimous approval from City Council for a pollinator park. And in the motion, the words were, Guelph is a world model for the promotion and protection of pollinators and their habitat, leading the way in environmental sustainability. The agreement stated that Pollination Guelph would be responsible for any of the plantings, including the funding of it, so there's going to be no cost to the city. But the city would be responsible for the landfill operation, which they would have been anyways, and any recreational trails, which they would have been anyways. So again, throughout the year, we had increased planning and more outreach. And again, once we got that approval from City Council, the media kind of went wild. We had so much media attention, both local through international. BBC contacted us at one point, looking for more information on the project. Of course, different ideas for the site were proposed. As soon as we came up with the idea of a pollinator park, we had ideas of trails, we'd have outlooks, little gazebos, and trees, and all sorts of things. Even some initial plan had toboggan hills, and lots of fun activities on the site. But of course, we had to figure out exactly what would work best for us, and what kind of habitat we wanted to create. We decided, with sort of spoiler alert, some of the things we found during our surveys, that with the need for open habitat in Ontario in general, like meadows are becoming increasingly rare, prairies are even more so. Some of the trait restrictions we found and specialist species we found, that we decided we really need to have a meadow kind of prairie system on the site. We thought, hey, this would be awesome. Let's think of this like a beautiful prairie full of flowers and be amazing for pollinators, because we know pollinators, they need nesting sites, but they also need a lot of food to feed on. And if any of you are familiar with kind of creating a grassland or a meadow, and particularly a prairie system, there are different ways to go about it. It also depends a lot on what the original site conditions is. Is it an old field? Is it currently agricultural setup, or is it a landfill site? So some common techniques that are used are prescribed burn. So burn off the vegetation that is there. So then, again, remember we talked about wanting to remove the vegetation and really do good site preparation before you start doing your plantings to ensure really good success. So burning is one option to remove that existing vegetation. You can use agriculture, particularly using a Roundup Ready soybean. So you could hit the site with pesticides to kill off any weeds in the seed bank, but still get a crop out of it. You can use those herbicides separately from agriculture. Just use that to get rid of the vegetation. You cultivate it or plow it, again, with agriculture or without. You try mowing the vegetation. So you even use grazing and letting your livestock, particularly things like goats and stuff, onto the site to help remove some of the weeds and vegetation. Even do solarization, or putting down a tarp, something similar, to block out the sun and kind of smother out the vegetation. But as we learned, there's different site challenges really would prevent many of these techniques from occurring on our site. For example, this is a landfill site, and with organics in particular, when they decompose, they produce methane gas. Spoiler alert, methane gas is very flammable. The initial idea of the open park was created before the city's decision for active methane collection. So some landfills just let the methane kind of off gas naturally, but the city decided to actually collect the methane and burn it off to generate electricity for the city. And this plant operated for about 17 years, generated about 1% of Guelph's energy during that time. So that was, pretty good for a landfill site that would otherwise be just sitting there to actually generate some of our electrical needs. And before and after the landfill was actually generating electricity, they just flared off the extra gas to prevent it from kind of causing any explosion, or just to concentrate it and get rid of it. But as I indicated, methane is very flammable. So our challenge for our site is no prescribed burns would be allowed. Obviously, we don't want to blow up the northeast corner of Guelph. Probably that bad, but we don't want to do it anyways. And so obviously then with methane being collected, needs something to collect it with. So there's a lot of infrastructure in the site, wellheads, pipes to collect that methane, to then sort of ship it or transport it over to the collection plant, and the energy from waste plant is located on the site itself. In addition to methane collection, there's leachate collection. So leachate is the kind of the residue of the water that's been contaminated potentially by the garbage. So picture again, water coming, leaching through, working its way through the garbage, could pick up contaminants and then get spread out. And to avoid that getting contaminating our aquifers or surrounding areas, is to do is collecting it and treating it at the sanitary sewers and with the normal methods of water cleaning, basically. And again, make sure that the infrastructure wasn't harming anything in the city. There's water monitoring still going on. It will be probably 50 years or so. So this all meant that, again, no fire would be allowed, plus no contour changes, no deep cultivation or any other obstacles, or there would be also be obstacles on the site to avoid. Literally, there are wellheads and fences and various things to avoid. As I mentioned, that leachate, we want to avoid leachate, and so we want to make sure the water does not penetrate the garbage. So that includes the clay cap that helps keep the water off of the garbage, as well as the contours of the site to allow the water to just shut off the edge of the landfill site. So this meant we do not want to disturb the clay cap. So can we plow the site? Nope. Can we plant to dig larger plants, like putting some big trees and shrubs? Not permitted. Can we plant trees and shrubs in general? Well, actually was concerned with the roots puncturing the clay cap. These people are always concerned with tree roots, finding water and digging their way into pipes. And so the same thing might happen with the clay cap. And while this is pretty doubtful, it was not permitted for our planning purposes. Again, the size of the site was a big challenge. It's too large for solarizing, like thinking of putting tarps on the site, doing mulching or hand weeding, at least on any scale. You could potentially do it on a very small scale, but the size of the site is 300 football fields, to give you perspective, about 40 hectares. And so, again, it restricts what we can do in the site and how it can be done. So if the plugs are really too costly and too time-consuming to use. Another concern is with potential contaminants. It's possible that the grasses and stuff growing inside might have some contaminants, so no livestock grazing would be permitted in either. Interestingly, pesticide use also required permission from the city council and province of Ontario to actually be used on the site. So additional challenge, even though it was a landfill site that who knows what's in there, we were not allowed to use pesticides without getting permits and permissions. Other challenges we experienced on the site was that this is a big community park in the actual city of Guelph, and the surrounding areas, I'll show some photos in a moment, was really being a subject for intense housing development happening. And so the city who commissioned a risk assessment determined that, this might be too much of a risk to allow the public to just walk into the site at any time with all that infrastructure, particularly the methane gas. So the site was actually fenced off in 2013 to prevent potential damage to the site infrastructure. This also meant, therefore, that no public access would be allowed to the site, and the idea of trails throughout the site was a no-go. And so it's just a few photos showing you the development of surrounding areas. Interesting, the top two photos are kind of landfill in operation and looking at the surrounding areas, and the bottom kind of shows you quickly a bird's eye view or satellite view of the infrastructure, or sorry, at least the surrounding housing developments in the area. So quite a bit. Again, the landfill sites is sort of semicircular or oval-shaped area here, and the community park, which we'll talk about, is on the side. The landfill portion and the unlandfilled portion. Just kind of a view from the actual site. So this is the blue stars indicate roughly the same point in both photos from different time periods. So the first photo on your left is 1997, and then the most recent one is just a couple weeks ago. And you can see what used to be just rural farm fields is now housing and apartment buildings. Similarly, looking west, used to be, well, so probably with some kind of habitat, fields, meadows, or forest, but it was agriculture when we first started looking at the site in 2007. And then again, by this year, last few years, we suddenly have housing and apartment buildings. Interestingly, this is one of the tallest places in Guelph you can be, the top of the landfill site. And yet you can see Church of Our Lady, which is a very famous Catholic church in downtown Guelph. You can see the spires. That's when in these blue circles, you can see the spires from the top of the landfill. It was pretty cool to see. Fortunately, the city took down the church took down the spires in the last couple of years for safety purposes and rehabilitation. So you can't see the spires anymore, but you sure see the tips of the roof anyways. It's only one more view of the site. For 2009, development was already started happening, but you can see again, rapid infill and development was occurring in the site. So although the site used to be surrounded by different types of natural habitats or quasi-natural habitats, it's a lot of it housing now. So that makes the park's habitat even more important to create properly and protect and conserve. Excuse me. I'll mention that there was a community park envisioned for the site as well for humans, not just for the bees. And so that non-landfill portion of the site, that kind of upper portion closer to Watson Road and Speedville Avenue, is where the community park has been installed. And it's a pretty big park. There are 4 soccer fields, 2 football fields. There's volleyball courts. There's a play equipment and splash pad for the kids. There's a washroom. There's a disc golf course. Bike parks being installed as we speak. These ideas hope to put an ice rink in the future. And of course, actually, you have recreational trails there and pathways around the site through a bit of a plantation area. So if you drive by here on, excuse me, losing my voice, a summer evening, it's the parking. These 2 parking lots are just full of cars. So there are a lot of people here for the sports or this play equipment, or just walking their dogs or running or biking. So a very well visited site. Here's a few pictures of the park, the community park side, taken from the landfill itself. So first, again, wasteland, literally and figuratively, followed by the development of the sports fields and the buildings and such. I have to take a drink of water here. Just bear with me for a moment. So back to the pollinator park. Although we started our planning in 2007, we first did our vegetation surveys in 2009. We all want to have a bit of a baseline idea. What was at the park before we actually do any habitat creation work? We started bird surveys in 2011. And from 2009 to 2011, we had bees and pollinator flies being investigated by the University of Guelph, and started doing bumblebee surveys in 2015, and also had some incidental observations by community scientists, such as those from the University of Guelph in a couple of classes. Spoiler alert for a couple of our results. You see here just one random image I selected was 2013 Eastern meadowlark and bobolink locations, and also American bumblebee that I found on the site. So wildlife have been using the park and are using it in multiple locations, which I'll again talk about in a few minutes. And here's just a few photos of the researchers on the site, about those doing bird surveys, bee surveys, and other types of wildlife observations. So, result of our monitoring, we found that, not surprisingly, pre-habitat creation is our default vegetation we're working with were non-native, cool season, allelopathic grasses. So these are non-native grasses that can exude a chemical from the roots that basically make the soil hostile for other things to grow into it. Basically sort of poison the soil for other plant species to grow into it. And this means that they're likely to outcompete any planters we put in the site. So we try to put something directly into those grasses, it probably would not take. And so we need to remove those grasses with herbicides. We also found many species of risk grassland birds and migratory birds, as I mentioned, bobolink and meadowlark, as well as a few others, which I'll talk about in the results, which led to more needs for permits and considerations. So with birds, the species at risk, there are things, for example, no maintenance on the site, no heavy equipment on the site, no mowing of the site to happen during the time that the birds will be there nesting on the site. It also meant because these are grassland specialists, we need to make sure we retain a grassland site. It's a low forb concentration. So the initial idea of us having a massive flower display, which would reduce to, we'll have flowers, but lower concentrations than potentially we would have had otherwise. So we want to maintain that more of a grassland site. As well, because we wanted to increase pollinators in general, and also because we found species risk bumblebees in the site, we wanted to avoid mowing during the flowering times, so kind of late spring through early fall. So you see a number of challenges we've experienced with our planning, but we kind of strove to meet them and get results. So we kept working on planning. So we got permission in 2009 by the city. We didn't actually start doing work until 2011. And what we did in that case in 2011, we started with site preparation involving the glyphosate Roundup herbicide, trying to knock back the vegetation, as well as mowing to reduce that thatch or that increase the vegetation on the site, to make it better for the seeds to be able to access the soil. We didn't get permission to do shallow rototilling, something called black invader. So though we weren't allowed to kind of dig up the site really with a normal plow, we were given permission to use this really shallow disc plow or mini rototiller in a sense. So we're going to go a few inches down to kind of, again, work up that soil, take it a bit easier potentially to seed into, and again, reduce some of those grasses. In 2 years after we started the site prep, we actually planted our first hectare. So we contracted the Rural Lambton Stewardship Network, also known as Ontario Nativescapes, to come up with a modified seed drill that was actually designed for native seeds, to handle the small seeds and different sizes of seeds. And we bought their bobolink-friendly native grassland seed mix for 38 different species. So not only were those grasses in there that the birds like, but also a number of forbs, flowering plants in intermix as well. And again, because native plants can take a year or two to germinate, we also added a cover crop of oats to help make sure that there was something growing that first year, especially the first spring, to reduce any chance of erosion happening. Again, the city was very concerned that that contours of the site would be changing. We have a lot of erosion happening that would affect the overall operation of the site. So a few photos of the seeds and the disc drill in operation, seed drill operation. But sadly and interestingly, the next year in 2014, there are no signs of the cover crops or the planted species in that first hectare we planted, just annual weeds. So no oats, no seed, nothing we planted showed up. We did have some stuff growing in that previously bare soil, a lot of just annual weeds and a few perennial things that come up from the seed bank. So no, that's kind of weird. Maybe we're just not seeing the seedlings. And then accidentally we had a spraying of glyphosate or the Roundup on our planted hectare. Contractor accidentally sprayed the wrong section. We wanted to spray the next section for preparation. But we took it in stride and said, well, we weren't seeing anything good, quote unquote, good that we planned coming up. So maybe it was a good thing for it to be sprayed to knock back some more of those annual weeds. And so again, it's more of the fasty grass that had kept growing in the site. So in addition to that hectare that was actually accidentally sprayed, we did spray the next 2 hectares. But we decided we weren't going to plant right away. We would do some more waiting and more thinking to see what happened the first phase before planting the second phase. We also initially thought about working on the next phase. We decided again, we'd hold off until we see what happened in the first phase. And I'm mentioning phases here just to give the idea that we did not have the resources, particularly finances, to plant up 45 hectares of the site. It cost several $1,000s, many thousands of dollars to just buy the seed to plant up 1 hectare. So we wanted to make sure we were doing things right and not sort of wasting our resources. So it's 2014, nothing really grew. It's kind of weird, but it's okay. Well, we'll see what happens the next year. We decided because of that spraying that had happened, chances are nothing might have been growing, or we want to replant anyways, just to be on the safe side. We also wanted to expand to that second phase, so with 2 more hectares. So we planted a total of 3 hectares in 2015. This time, instead of using a seed drill, we used a seed broadcaster, using the same seed mix, and started mowing the next phase, phase 3. For phase 2, that's 2 hectares, we did not use a buckavator. We did not actually dig up the soil. We just kind of mowed and removed the thatch on the site. So that's 2015. You sort of see a photo here. The bottom photo especially kind of shows you the scale of the site. You see the mowed area inside that red box. And if you squint really hard, if you have a big enough screen, you'll see the 2 tractors that were broadcasting the seed in the image. So again, a really big site, and there's just sort of 3 hectares of it. The above photo showed you the red box, that same 2 red boxes match up. And just kind of quick aside, although the main pollinator park was fenced off and not open to the public, we did actually partner with a community artist called Christina Kingsbury to create a remediate project. That's in the little blue box there. This is a really neat endeavor that she undertook to combine native seeds with recycled paper to create a seed quilt for pollinators. So she used native pollinator-friendly seeds, embedded into paper she made, and quilted it together and laid it on the earth. It's part of our artistic project to help heal the earth and raise awareness to the hurt that the earth experienced through the whole landfill process. And so this, as you see, the first photo again was just a grassy area of the community park that wasn't being used, and so we created habitat for pollinators. And it's a really nice spot. You could actually walk into this part of the site, look at the flowers, look at the pollinators. But I'm not going to talk about that project. If you have questions, we chat about it later, but it's not part of the actual sort of landfill restoration project or habitat creation project. So 2015, we replanted 3 hectares. 2016, next year, we went looking again, And again, no germination of planted seeds. It's like, well, what's going on? Which I'll talk about in a minute. We were getting a lot more flowering weeds, quote unquote, and less grasses. So we were creating a difference. We were creating things that the bees would like. A lot of them were non-native, for example, vetches and clovers, but still a lot more habitat and flowers than were there before. So what is going on? We planted the site twice in 1 hectare and then 3 hectares, and nothing was growing up. So what's going on? Maybe it was method of seeding. So we did a seed drill the first year and then the seed broadcaster the next phase in 2015. So maybe with the broadcaster, we didn't have very good soil contact. Maybe the seeds were blown away or washed away. Maybe the animals came in and ate them. Because actually, was a light rain during the plant didn't help hold the seeds in place, so they shouldn't have blown away. We did remove most of the vegetation from the site, and we're patches of bare ground, so they should have been able to find soil contact through that rain. And again, over the winter as well, there'd be rain and snow to help push the seeds down into the ground. And there are no plants growing at the base of the hill. So we thought if it was perhaps there was a flood and all the seeds washed off, we'd think this would be plants growing at the base of the hill, which was not the case. And again, maybe the problem was that thatchy vegetation on the site, the residual roots and vegetation from the grasses. But the seed drill that we used, the previous planting in the bare soil did not work either. So we don't think it was a method of seeding that was the problem. Well, what else could it be? Was it the seed itself? Now, we did buy it from a known high-quality provider, so there shouldn't be any problems with it. We didn't expect any problems. I've used the seed elsewhere with no problems, but okay, maybe it's the seed. So we didn't do any testing in 2013. So again, we started it to work. So in 2015, we did do some tests. We did a subsample before the planting and stratified over the winter as it would naturally be occurring, the landfill site. Sowed into potting soil, grew in lab conditions, and no problem. All the seeds germinated. We had really good success rate for germination. Okay, so not the seed. Maybe it's the soil. This is a landfill site. Maybe something's wrong with the soil. It's poor quality soil. So we did take soil from the landfill site, took seeds from a different batch. We didn't have any more seeds from the batch we purchased and we're going to sowed from, but we got some other seeds from known quality, known source, and sowed those into landfill soil under lab conditions, and no problem as well. This is the University of Guelph was growing these for us, so I'll just put a plug in for them as a thanks for their plant department. Again, no problem with the soil growing plants. So doesn't seem the method of seeding, doesn't seem the method of using the soil or similar types of issues of germination success. Maybe it's the site itself. It's a landfill site. Maybe there's methane gas affecting the planting. There are occasionally bare patches of ground with no vegetation, basically dieback vegetation. So maybe there's methane killing off the roots of the plants, even though the grasses are there. Maybe it's a drought issue. Sometimes the site gets really dry. Again, the clay cap's designed to shed water. Maybe it's just competition. Even though we did, again, that first hectare removed the grasses from the site. Maybe it's something else. So we did plant seedlings directly into the site. Those plants we'd grown up as our test plants, we did plant them into landfill in 2016 and monitored them in 2017. And we found that, interesting enough, although it can be very dry and baked soil later in the summer, in the springtime they're being soaked in water. So again, clay caps can help absorb water, and sometimes as you have, although it wasn't a site's not perfectly sloped or a perfect, say, 45-degree angle, it does have lulls and valleys, hills and valleys. So sometimes water pools and basically drowning out our vegetation in some spots. We did find with no basically care and maintenance of these plantings, they were subsumed by the site through competition. So that's also depressing in a sense. But in 2017, the next year, we did have to get some germination. So not extreme germination, not as much as we expected, but there are patches. And sometimes even furrows. You see in the top left photo, a whole furrow for some reason, black-eyed Susans and other things coming up in it. There are coreopsis. They said that first year expected kind of yellow bloom. Often prairies have a yellow flush in their first years with the coreopsis, the black-eyed Susans, and related flowers. We had bee balm, other things coming up. Even the first the first leaves of the plants like prairie dock, it takes some time to grow. We also had a lot of non-native plants coming in, even native plants coming in from the wind, from birds, or from seed banks. For example, again, asters, goldenrods, vetches, Queen Anne's lace, lots of different diversity of quote-unquote weeds coming in. We didn't plant them, but they were growing up and are valuable for pollinators. Fast forward next year, 2018, it's kind of a site where I featured in the city's Natural Heritage Action Plan video. and the landfill as a pollinator park was included in the National Heritage Plan as another type of habitat to be protected and conserved, which again, nice to see. The city is being very supportive of us keeping this as a habitat for wildlife in general. In 2018, we had similar growth as 2017. We had a few more of the planted species coming up. We had a lot of worries with competition. So coming up through thick grasses were coming back into the site. As I mentioned, there's some weed species, but those are good for pollinators and are much better than the grasses that were there. So we consider that a success. We're still not sure why we're not seeing more germination in the site even a year later. Again, it can take several years for sometimes native seeds to germinate. So maybe we're still waiting, quote unquote. And again, you see some photos of the site. There are flowers on the site, and there are pollinators using the site. So it is a success in that vein. 2019 to present, we're still having more issues with those grasses retaking. Again, the seed bank had been there for I can't do math in my head, almost 18 years, or probably 20 years, at least. Therefore, there's a lot of seeds still come up. The roots are notorious for some of these fescue grasses and the bromes to even fragments can regrow. We are seeing more quote wildflowers. Look at those 3 hectares we planted and mowed versus the broader part of the site. It definitely is a difference in my opinion. We're now testing the effects of mowing, so we haven't done any planting since 2015, but we have kept up with the mowing every couple of years to help keep the vegetation sort of knocked back, not mowing the entirety of the site, but doing different sections of the site. This is through the support of the city of Guelph, doing it in kind, and great support as well, again, for any of our planning activities. And we've kept up our different funnel surveys. And again, here's some pretty pictures of flowers on the site. In some places, we're getting some big clusters of flowers. Other spots is still pretty bare, mostly grasses. But again, much better than initial site conditions that were there. We did another test. We're still sort of wondering what's going on at the site. Again, we kind of want to move forward in the site. There's a lot of public attention to the site. Everyone thinks it's a done deal. So we thought maybe we'll try something different. Maybe we'll try raised beds. Maybe they'll help us if we bring in soil, bring in some mulch, bring in plugs. Maybe that'll help. Maybe the older plants, relatively older, the plugs will help withstand the conditions of the site a bit better. Example, any droughts or conditions in the mulch would help with that as well. So we did a bed in 2020, and that seemed to work really well. So we put 3 more in 2022 and 2023. They've had very minimal maintenance, just a few weeds pulled out in that first year, but a couple times a year, and that's basically been it. And so they're doing pretty well. There's some competition coming back in. Some of the grasses are overtaking them again, but still compared to pre-existing conditions, great success. And especially these dense plantings are just full of pollinators. You go in there and it's just literally buzzing. And it's just full of bees, full of butterflies, full of different moss and different creatures. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So I'll let the slide sit for a minute to build suspense for the excitement I'm going to talk about in a moment. So if you're reading ahead, the big excitement in 2022 was we found a Henslow sparrow at the Eastview Pollinator Park. This is one of the rarest breeding birds in Canada. It's considered endangered provincially and federally, and is found by Chris earlier, our naturalist who's on the site. He gave me a text that day. He's like, "Can I give you a call with something we found at Eastview?" It's like, "What did you find at Eastview?" Of course, building anticipation for me. He's like, "What'd you find? What'd you find? What'd you find?" So he told me, "It's like, oh my goodness!" Like, of course, googling it right away. I'm not a bird, so I thought it was rare, but I wasn't sure how rare it was. And I actually googled and then talked to Chris some more. So unfortunately, he did not find a mate. He did not settle down and raise little baby Henslow sparrows, but does show the value of the habitat. That this bird flying by thought, "Hey, this is a pretty good spot. I think we'd set up shop here and look for a mate." So it's such a rare find, and we didn't share it with the public or even with the full board of Pollination Guelph until the next year because we did not want to do anything to risk jeopardizing this bird from nesting. It also showed us an example of the benefits of this fence the city put up. That initially we were disappointed the city put up this perimeter fence to keep people off the site and away from the infrastructure. But it worked out that there are no dogs allowed on the site. Lots of dogs walk around the edges of the site. Again, a very popular dog walking location. They can't actually go inside and disturb the nesting birds. So it's very much a sort of sanctuary for the birds to go in and nest. Not just Henslow sparrow, but all the other migratory birds and breeding birds, grassland birds that are using the site. So what else did you find in the site? So you have Henslow sparrow, you have bobolink, eastern meadowlark, at least 47 different species of birds, probably more. I think I might need to double check Chris's list and a couple of the colleagues' lists of species, make sure I'm not missing any. Other species at risk include the barn swallow have been using the site, and lots of other species, the swallows. I love the killdeers are already back at the site the last couple of weeks. We even had species not necessarily using the site itself. I don't know if we have osprey, but they're nesting in the park the non-landfill park, excuse me, the where those sports fields are, there's some big lights, and so they're nesting on top of light fixtures. So still providing habitat for species even outside the landfill portion of the site. Again, if you're really interested in seeing the results, check out the webinar recording later on to see the full species list in more detail, more time to read. In terms of bees and flies, for that first couple of years of sort of baseline pollinator surveys, we had at least 12 different genera of pollinating flies. A lot of these are kind of the usurper flies or flower flies. We had about 16 at least genera of bees. Some of them are ground nesting, some of them are stick nesting, some of them are more parasitic, some of them are, I should say, normal, non-host species, or are host species, I guess I should say. And again, if you're interested, we can talk about them more. You can Google to learn more about them after the fact. Love the sweat bees and will lick your sweat. They are at the park. The bumblebee species are in the park, at least 10 different species. So the other species I mentioned, or things I listed in the previous slide, were genera, and these are actually species. So although I indicated, for instance, there are 12 different genera of flies and 16 genera of bees, there could be many more species. We didn't actually look into, at least for this presentation, the actual details of a number of species located. But bumblebees are kind of my focal species in another hat. And so I looked at, I've been doing bumblebee surveys there the last few years and found 10 different species so far, almost all the species you would expect to find, such a habitat we were finding, including the American bumblebee and the yellow-banded bumblebee, which are both species at risk now, or at least a special concern. For yellow-banded and American is also a special concern. So it's really exciting to see all these different species. What plant species are in the park? Well, kind of embarrassing to say, we haven't done any surveys since the baseline survey in 2009, so we haven't actually done a formal survey as to what's there now. But I know from being on site myself and looking to see what the pollinators have been visiting, we have a number of different plant species. Again, I'm not going to read them all out right now. A large amount of what we planted is coming up in spits and spurts, like the the odd patch of Indian grass, the odd patch of blue stem, big and little. They're mints, but not as much as we'd think. So this isn't really density. This is just their presence absence. But also a large number of non-native plant species. Again, the vetches are really big, but also things like we have patches of thistles coming up, which are great for the birds, great for the pollinators as well. But a lot of those non-native grasses, particularly elsewhere in the site, spurges is so common as well. And again, you look at the site if you want this list later on, if you're interested in the details. And this is not exhaustive. I'm sure there are plants there. I actually know there are plants there I didn't list. What other species are in the park? Well, it's a pollinator park. So there are butterflies and moths and beetles. They're all pollinators. I'm just not focusing on them today. There are dragonflies, frogs, and toads because there are some ponds adjacent to the site in that non-landfill portion. There are some stormwater management ponds, so they are providing aquatic habitat for some species. Interestingly, there are coyotes and deer that occasionally use the park, more so before it's fenced off, but even with the fence, occasionally deer get into the park. They manage to jump the fence somehow. Oh, it's like a, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 foot fence, but they manage to get in there. And of course, there are a lot of diversity of plants and animals in the park that I'm not getting into. It's a diverse ecosystem. And for ecology, but not species-based, I love the landfill site for its openness. Such beautiful skies. I find storms rolling in, sunny days with cloudless skies or cloudy skies. It's just a beautiful sight. One memorable night with the Remediate Project, Christina Kingsbury organized a full moon walk. So we went up and apologies, I can't remember the name of the moon. It was a particular moon. We had an Indigenous elder out talking to us about different things, including plants and animals. So it was a really nice night to walk up and see the full moon in the landfill site. There's a bunch of beautiful skies. We love sunsets there as well. It's just in a city to have such a big open space is such a rarity, especially now with infill and intensification. To have open skies and see sunsets is just does our heart well. As mentioned, we're getting a lot of public attention. The Remediate planting have been great for bringing people to the site and more hands-on. Pollination Guelph has been doing tours to the site. The community park, as I mentioned, has literally hundreds of users there on a given summer's evening. Even though we've joked about that, Google Maps now has Pollinator Park listed as a site, or as a site name. So according to Google Maps, we are a thing. And we got a lot of media attention. We've had TV, we've had newspapers, radio have all been covering our work. So it's been great with the media attention, and also different people covering academically, and other like trades magazines or journals have been covering our work as well. So lots of attention. It's been really great to see. So in summary, to turn a landfill to a pollinator park, it's a long process, at least it was in our case. The initial idea came up literally 18 years ago to this month was when we came up with the idea at the first. We formed Pollination Guelph, got approval from City Council. It was a long delay then to get all the permissions and permits and even in funding. Again, this is a very costly process, so it took a long time to get some funding for this first couple of hectares. We planted the first hectare in 2013, the next three in 2015 with only moderate success, good success with the raised beds, and there are a lot of challenges on the site. But despite those challenges, we've really increased the plant diversity on the site. It is supporting pollinators and birds and other species at risk, and it's been great for education, outreach, and just beauty. So what are our next steps? We're still going to keep our mowing in these first few phases just to keep again the vegetation a bit constrained, hopefully keep those grasses back a little bit, let the native plants establish a bit more. We'll do some more maintenance of those raised beds, maybe do a few more. I want to repeat the vegetation survey to see exactly what is growing now on our site, not just my incidental observations. Could you do a faunal surveys? We're going to get any more native birds or rare birds coming into the site? Maybe. But I'm also encouraging future research. So if anyone out there is a researcher who's interested in doing work on plants, on pollinators, on soil, on air quality, emissions, and something like that, like reach out to us. Be happy to really have the site be embraced and used for more research. One big next step, again, if anyone listening here has some tips or want to get involved and help us out, we want to get some more advice on our next steps for the site maintenance and habitat progression. So we only planted 3 hectares of 45. We've had minimal success. Perhaps you have some ideas yourself that you can share with us. So if you have any tips or advice, we'd be happy to chat. We do have some money even to help commission a report. So if you're interested and have the expertise, please reach out to us, pollinationguelph@gmail.com. And finally, a big thank you to the City of Guelph, the Parks and Rec Department, Solid Waste Resources, and City Council for all their support. Province of Ontario, for example, the species at risk biologists who have been giving us some advice. Rural Land and Stewardship Network or Ontario Nativescapes for all their advice and equipment and seed. Researchers from various institutions, all our volunteers from Pollination Guelph, both board members as well as our keen volunteers out there doing hands-on work. A special big thanks to our funders, both in kind, for example, the City of Guelph, as well as Wildlife Preservation Canada, TD Friends of the Environment, and private donors. And with that, with any time left, have it take questions, or you can reach out to us again at pollinationguelph@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Turn it over to Tracy or Vicky.
Thanks so much, Victoria. That's fabulous. I'm just going to pull up this slide and we're going to jump to questions and answers with Vicky. If you want to jump on, Vicky.
Yeah, hi. Alrighty. So we got a few questions under our question and answers. Let me just go on and see them. All right, so the first one that came from Michelle was regarding the oat cover crop. And she asked, did you consider that the oat cover crop that was used in the first year may have prevented good germination of the native plants? Yeah.
Yes and no. It's a technique that's been used before. It was recommended to us. So we don't think it competed, like the potential, but sorry. I suppose it was some potential for drawing moisture from the seeds, but also the idea was that the oats would then provide some shade to the seeds growing up. And so I don't think there's an issue. Again, it's a technique that's been used elsewhere. For example, Ontario Nativescapes, I'm sure Tallgrass Ontario and others have been using it. So I don't think there's an issue, but definitely a food for thought. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next one, was there any topsoil on the clay cap before the cool season grasses were seeded? And so I guess this is the way I'm also seeing this question. I also have like a similar question. Was there any sort of amendment done, or was it like with topsoil, or was it just like that they were seeded into the, or that the cool season, I guess, grasses were seeded directly into the clay cap itself?
Yeah, so the city closure plan did involve topsoil, both clay and the clay cap, clay soil is put down, then topsoil is put over top. Topsoil is just sort of from the site and from, I think, even neighboring developments. So low quality topsoil, most likely. So potentially that's a factor. We did think about doing some amendments, but again, we wanted to do something a large scale, so we didn't want to get into amendments. And also native plants are generally pretty resourceful, even on crappy soils, they can grow. So we didn't do any amendments initially. It is a consideration. Again, we did those raised beds at the end. We did bring soil in, higher quality topsoil. So we thought, again, maybe this might be a factor, and plants were growing much better in that. So it could be a factor. So we didn't do any amendments of the soil, but definitely it could be a factor. Something, such a poor quality soil, maybe it's just too poor quality. it is growing the grasses quite well, but the grasses can be much more amiable for crappy soils potentially.
That makes sense. So the next question comes from, so this was Pamela, who was also talking in the chat that I believe out in Surrey, they also are potentially looking at some landfill restoration. And so the question was, are the details of the seed palette, I love that word, so the seed mix, and overall site plan available? I found the master plan online, but would love to get further details. And the slide deck would be great as well.
Yes, the slide deck is Tracy et al. Have mentioned it's going to be online in the near future. At the moment, the seed listener plan's not online anywhere. That I don't think. I'm sure Terra Nativescapes probably have a website still with the seed mix, but you can definitely reach out to us and we can share the plant mix with you. In hindsight, the plant mix, well, it was a standard bobolink mix. It probably have some species that perhaps weren't as amiable to the sites, more specialized species, or specialized, but more picky species. They maybe aren't as hardy. So we were thinking of reseeding with more, just like very tolerant plants, like just seed with milkweeds and asters, for instance. So that's really hardy rather than more finicky things like some of the, like abelias, for instance. Some of the more prettier plants you might find in prairies where perhaps aren't quite as tolerant to landfill conditions. But definitely reach out to us and we can share the list with you. And this is in some ways the worst case scenario for installations. Like people are installing prairies and grassland habitat all the time with great success, even on aggregate pits. But just for our site, we just, for whatever reasons, some of it's the infrastructure, some of it's restrictions. We can't mow it. We can't, well, we sort of mowed it. We can't burn it. We can't really disc it up too much. Could be some of the reasons we're having issues, or the establishment of that cap and those brome grasses are just too difficult maybe for us.
Awesome, thank you. And then another follow-up by Pamela as well is, was there any indication that domestic honeybees occurred in numbers that would indicate competitive stress on native bees?
Definitely honeybees at the site. Definitely would be stress on our native bees, but that wouldn't be affecting the seed germination success. So yes, honeybees are using the site, even though technically beekeeping is illegal in the city in terms of habitat size. I need to be, I can remember, 10 meters away from a property line. People do have honeybees in the city. They are non-native species. You might be surprised for many people in the audience that they actually are an introduced species that can outcompete our native bees and transfer diseases to our native bees. So we value honeybees for the honey, but we don't recommend people keeping them in their backyards because it can cause some problems with their native ecosystem. So native honeybees, honeybees have been on the site, but wouldn't affect germination of the plants. But our concern for native species, but not, we can't put a fence up to keep the bees out, kind of. We can't restrict honeybees from the site. So nothing we really can do about those.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for that. The next question comes from Lorraine, and just wanted to confirm, so the reasons for poor germination were not discovered, question. Like whether you know what the reasons were yet. Yeah,
we don't know. We have some suspicions, like some of it's, finicky soils, perhaps finicky species, but or perhaps just just conditions are too harsh, but we're just not sure. So we did different tests, but we're not sure. So again, love to have researchers out here, even hobbyists, if you have the time and energy, reach out to us and we chat more. So I'll pop in the chat the microbiome. We didn't look at microbiome. Some species do need microorganisms and fungal associations, for instance, to germinate. So we didn't look at that or anything like that at all, or how present that low allelopathic tendencies of the grasses, how long that persists in the soil, I don't know. So we were dealing with that as well.
Awesome. That makes sense. A follow-up that also ties in well to this for Maria is, was the acidity of the soil tested?
I don't think so. We at one point talked about testing the soil test, but I don't think we ever get results from that if we did. So I don't know what the acidity level is of the soil. But again, perfect opportunity to do more tests. Like we have some ideas for more tests, but just overwhelming sometimes. We're all volunteers. We all have other full-time jobs and careers and families. Sometimes we get distracted from our different ideas we could undertake.
Yeah, to me sounds like there's lots of research opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have a question from Ian. Are there any future plans for opening the site up to the public in ways that don't involve either tours or guided access? Do you think that this would, oh my goodness, sorry. Do you think that this would significantly impact the success of the site? Thinking, for example, about passive bird watching.
Yes, at the moment you can passive bird watch from the outskirts of the landfill. So all around the landfill is a roadway you can walk on. People walk on, you bird from that location. At the moment, there's no plans to remove the fence. the infrastructure is still on the site. They're still collecting methane. They're flaring it off. They're not burning it for electricity, but they are flaring it off. So there is still the infrastructure on site. Still collecting that leachate. Leachate will be another 10, 20 years, probably at least, to collect that leachate. 50 years for water quality monitoring. So I don't envision the fence coming down the next couple of decades. So it would just be guided tours or by special permission to access the site. If you are a keen birder, please reach out. We'd love to have more people, keeping an eye on the site, with the expertise to get more, have Chris Early coming out a couple times a year, sometimes a couple other colleagues who went out doing surveys. But again, we work with more observations for more people. But unfortunately, no public access. But at the same time, we're sort of thinking maybe it's a good thing. We know how people go off trail all the time that potentially could be damaging the plantings, or again the dogs and other animals, or even people themselves interfering with the nesting birds. So sort of pros and cons of the fence being up there, but no plans anytime soon for it to come down.
That makes sense for the site. And then another question is from Paul, who says that you noted the site has a high elevation and you did show an image of successful germination in a furrow. Is it possible wind eroded seed off the site? It would be interesting to see how seed applied by hydroseeding with a tackifier would perform.
Yeah, good point. We actually considered that at one point, which is the cost was too much for us to undertake at the time, do the hydroseeding to basically, for those who aren't familiar with the technique, it's basically applying kind of like a, how do I word, solution to the seeds that helps them retain moisture. Sometimes you see, for example, in construction sites along highways, like a green, they don't spray paint the soil green, but it looks like a green or blue spray painted ground. And that's the hydroseeding of the seed. So giving the extra boost to maintain the site. It's possible stuff blew off the site, but again, there wasn't high winds when we planted. We had light rain one day that we think could help tap it down and get things embedded in the soil a bit more. We didn't suddenly have native plants growing anywhere else on the site. I walk around the community park, and it's not just community park. There is fringes of grass, sort of grassy areas along the edges of the park, edges of the fence. We aren't seeing seeds growing there either. Where you think if it was windborne, the seeds would have caught and collected. We would see a lot more seeds growing or plants growing in those areas. So it's possible some blew away. I just don't think that's the answer.
Thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. And that's the end of questions that we have in the Q&A, which I think is pretty perfect timing. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Vicki. So Victoria, I have a few questions. If we had a partner considering doing a landfill project, what kind of advice or prep would you suggest to them?
So definitely reach out to experts with Tallgrass Ontario and similar organizations that do this all the time and have much better expertise than we have. We're kind of muddling our way through, but we can provide a few tips, but some of the experts are doing this on the time on a full-time basis. But I think the vegetation management is a key, especially if you're dealing with things like these cool season grasses that are just so hard to deal with. Getting a really good establishment or good site prep is key. There is a lot more concern now using glyphosate than when we first started. It's around that time that carcinogen effects are starting to become a bit more known. So you want to consider that or other options, but still kind of the best option that I know of right now. But reach out to the experts and really get that site prepared before you start putting the seed down. If you can put down plugs might work better. Another goal of those raised beds we're testing to see is that maybe they can act for seed rain. Maybe we can establish some beds with the good soil and sort of heavy concentrations of plants. Maybe they would sort of self-seed into the adjacent areas and fight off the brome grass a bit better. So that also is an opportunity potentially for other sites. Maybe want to do some targeted plantings with amendments and such for the soil. So maybe they act as little oases or reservoirs of seed then to populate the rest of the site.
Right, totally makes sense. Yeah, and just a comment too, as you know, we have a landfill project, and when you were talking about the fungal amendments, we were trying a compost tea application on half of our site to see if we can compare if it made a difference in boosting the native species. And a couple other sites we've tried a product called MycoBloom, which is a product you put in when you seed to help again with the fungal life of that soil. So just throwing that out there too as an idea. So
yeah. So it'd be interesting to test again on landfill. Like we have lots of opportunities for test space, lots of control plots and test plots available. Be interesting to do more work on these types of things, do some amendments in some areas, do some more plugs, planting direct plugs directly into the site, but maybe maintain them the first couple of years, that kind of thing. So lots of opportunities, lots of ideas for sure.
Mm-hmm. And just an overall question. So even though you didn't completely meet your your full vegetation objectives, you still had a lot of species using the area in general, and obviously the rare species. So do you consider that a win, even though you didn't completely meet what you were hoping to achieve?
You get a lot of conflicted thoughts about Eastview every year or 2 weeks. We should just give up on the project, throw our hands up at defeat, say, we give up. We did our best, we give up. And then we start seeing this success, like the Henslow Sparrow give us a huge reinvigoration. It's like, wow, this is working. Like, this is good. So we're sort of considering it a win. Again, not nearly meeting our goals or envisioned plan, but it's helping even protect the habitat. Like, again, benefit of having all that infrastructure in the site is that city's not going to develop into housing or put a golf course on there kind of thing. It will be restricted. So we're maintaining it as an open habitat. So that right there is a win. And the public attention to being a pollinator park is a win. And the fact that it is producing more species, even the mowing seems to be helping to allow other sort of very strong weed species, again, like the common milkweed and the ashes and goldenrods to come in and establish. So even in the planted sections of the site, we are seeing a few more, at least in some sections, more of the quote weeds, but the pollinator friendly weeds come in. So
Right.
I think it is a win overall. Not a strong win, but still a win that we'll take.
Yeah, because if you think of all the landfills on the landscape, the potential for these kinds of projects could be huge, right?
Yes, yeah, and there is some work. Some landfills have been having pollinator habitat created. It's a big one down the states. I want to say
New York.
New York, yes.
Kills.
I think the word kills in there. My mind's going blank on me right now. They have pollinator habitat, and then we are designing this to be pollinator habitat, but even in general, landfill or any habitat being restored to like a prairie or created to be a prairie or meadow is creating pollinator habitat. So that indicated there are lots of organizations creating, prairies and meadows now. They're creating pollinator habitats. So it's definitely an amazing idea and way to create habitat. And we'll put a plug into to try to keep these as open habitats. We even just approached by someone recently, we should plant a site with more trees and shrubs. It'd be great. But we still need to keep the open habitat as well as on our landscape. So one great thing about Raceway, like you have the hydro corridor in your photo here, that they need to be kept more of a grassland or open site. We can't have a forest growing underneath them. Just another way to maintain some open habitat on our landscapes.
And it's always great to have mosaic, right? Some open habitat, some forested habitat.
Some species need that. They need, even the landfill is great for that because those adjacent or swampy areas and some plantation area that some of the species can nest in and then forage in the landfill itself. They may not nest there, or vice versa. They nest in landfill and forage elsewhere.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Victoria, for your time. This has been fabulous. I hope all the participants got a lot out of it. And of course, this will be been recorded and we're going to put it on the YouTube channel. And Victoria, if you wanted to throw your email in the chat there too, if there's anyone who wants to reach out to you directly, feel free. And just wanted to put a plug out again for our Rights of Way network with your email there and all of our free guides.